So I know that you've been walking by the site, and it is moving so quickly, isn't it? Say yes. Say yes. My boss is back there, so we want to make sure it's going quickly. Hey, I wanted to let you I wanted you to see an insider's look at what's going on behind that fence. So who's up for that? Well, that's what it's going to look like. One of these days, trust me, and it's going to be incredible. But, here's where we are. This was a few weeks ago. Right over here, we have dug, we filled in, then we compacted, and then you dig it back out. This is the basement. Also, you can see the rock wall, and those guys are magnificent. They do great work. It's really what ties Compton Gardens all the way to Crystal Bridges is that rock wall right there, and it just happens to look very, very good in a Frank Lloyd Wright house. And then we poured the basement. You can see that the shape is very linear, very rectangular, but the house is small. It's 1,700 square feet. And that is the complete footprint minus the carport. But it will have a splendid view looking at Crystal Pond. And so really what you're seeing, the front of the house is to my right. And of course the back of the house, which is the entire glass structure, faces the pond. This is today. We are hours away from the Cherokee Red Concrete. And let me tell you, that's a big, big milestone moment because, like I told Rod, there's no going back after that. You pour that red concrete, you're in, and we are in. So tomorrow is the day. This is when the house comes home. So we're excited about that. And we don't want to forget about what is going on at the site. The University of Arkansas has partnered with Crystal Bridges, and these students have created an interpretation pavilion like nothing you've ever seen. We asked them to take Frank Lloyd Wright principles and what would he have done with today's technology? These students, they're fifth-year architecture students, they say, not a problem. And then you say, oh, by the way, about, 300,000 people are going to come through here the first year. I mean, you want to talk about wide-eyed kids. But you know what? This is the greatest thing, is Crystal Bridges gave them an opportunity to design and to build. And you know what they learned? They learned that not everything on paper goes in how you install it. I saw young ladies welding today that have just learned to weld. They were like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. Why did I design it like this? I love it. And so this is the group right here. A lot of students have been part of this job, but we hope to have completion here real soon. This is kind of a look as you would walk through the pavilion, and you can see the clerestory windows on your left. That has a real Wrightian look. They have come up with an opaque shell that looks like the underbelly of a leaf, looks like the veins of a leaf. And so as you walk through here, it will lead you to the house, and you will learn about Frank Lloyd Wright. You will learn about the legacy of Fay Jones, Crystal Bridges, Moshe Safdie, and then the next generation of designers, which are these students. And today, this was a picture for today. They were like, oh my gosh, what have we got ourselves into? And they just actually quit working just a few minutes ago. So anyway, that's what's going on. Cherokee Red Concrete, University of Arkansas Pavilion. We're well on our way. So let's get ready for Sean tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, for that. Sean has been here since Monday working with the team, consulting about the project and getting prepared for the preservation. And I did want to share a little bit about Sean more formally. Sean Malone is the president and CEO of the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, and he has earned a reputation for innovative, focused, and mission-driven nonprofit leadership. During Malone's first 2 years as CEO of the foundation, he has overseen the groundbreaking joint stewardship of the Frank Lloyd Wright Archives between the foundation, the Museum of Modern Art, and Columbia University's Avery Architectural and Fine Arts Library. Another interesting project, he has done an in-depth preservation master plan to define how Taliesin West will be preserved for generations to come. He's also worked on a comprehensive tour evaluation and interpretive plan to project the most meaningful experience for 100,000 visitors every year. He's working on a significant expansion of STEM's distance learning K-12 education program and architecture. And finally, he's more than doubled the foundation's annual contributed income. So again, it's with great honor to have Sean here tonight to share about the foundation. Let's welcome Sean.
Hello. Hi, am I on? Oh, now I'm on. Hello, how are you? Well, I mean, it's just such a, there's a picture we want to see, right? The Bachman-Wilson house. It's so great to be here at Crystal Bridges to say welcome to the newest member of the Frank Lloyd Wright family. So I hope all of you are proud and excited of what's happening here. I have to tell you, yeah. It's really extraordinary. I mean, you guys can say we have a new Frank Lloyd Wright house going in, and I don't think anybody else on the planet is able to say that right now. I kind of love going on to Wikipedia and all the other places that you can get information about the house, and they aren't quite sure where to put it on the map anymore. Like they've got the New Jersey map, they're trying to take it off, they're bringing on Arkansas, so it's literally getting on the map. Again, I've been having a great time spending time with people here, and Scott was talking a little bit about the way that he approached this project with the University of Arkansas students, which was very meaningful to me, and getting to meet them was very meaningful. And in fact, what I'd come here hoping to chat about tonight was to talk a little bit about Wright through the lens of 5 of his core principles. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, have a few photos and images to take a look at, and then I hope we have plenty of time for Q&A, because I've been told this is a very engaged group, so that's the part I like the best. So we're going to talk about 5 of the core principles, not that they're all of his core principles. We're going to talk about architecture as a cause, design for all, experimentation and learning by doing, public engagement and provocation, and finally, integrity. And I think that these principles speak to a deep relevance in Wright's work, and also speak to the decisions that we all make every day in our lives that really define who we are and how we interact with each other. But before we jump into all that, I thought I'd start by sharing just a little bit of the artistry that attracts, I think, so many of us to the work of Frank Lloyd Wright.
A genius is a man who has an eye to see nature. A genius is a man who has a heart to feel nature. And a genius is a man who has the courage to follow nature. Read that if you can.
I think anybody who can email me the names of every building, I'll send a prize to. I didn't tell you that ahead of time, because, all right, so the first principle I want to talk about is architecture as a cause. Wright saw architecture as a fundamental tool in building a democratic society, in constructing a culture, in reconciling civilization to the environment, and to releasing the potential of everyday life. This idea was beautifully captured in 1908 in the title of his very first essay when he was introducing his work to the world. He called it "In the Cause of Architecture." And he used that title a number of times throughout his career to come back to trying to convey what he thought of as the big ideas. And in talking about architecture as a cause, you'll always hear me more loudly when I look at the slides, so my apologies. When he was talking about that, Wright answered the often asked question, what is architecture, by saying that it has a larger purpose. It is more than the provision of shelter. It's more than an art for adorning the landscape. And it's more than a way of enhancing the space of a city. He felt it was something that should set out to change the patterns in which our society works, to give us better ways to live our daily lives, to bring us into a new relationship with the environment that surrounds us, and as a result, to help us reach a more elevated understanding of our own nature. Speaking in London in the urgent days of 1939, Wright called architecture a great living spirit, I'm quoting him here, the center line of culture, something we must have right or miss the beat of rhythms that life has to bring us. He felt that failing to use architecture to adapt our way of life to a changing world would render us victims of progress in technology and science, rather than, as he put it, using them creatively and beautifully. Always one to forward architecture as the mother of all art, he put forth that, again quoting Wright, architecture is basic to culture. Music is an attribute of culture. So is painting and sculpture. But architecture you experience, the other things you accede to. So without architecture, you cannot have culture. Now, the transformative scope of Wright's cause has been recognized by many Wright scholars, and it's worth noting that I am not a scholar nor an architect. I put myself deeply in the camp of enthusiast, which I think is what many of us are in the room tonight. The Wright scholar Anthony Olofsson describes Wright's view of the purpose of architecture as a means of social change, the quest for an ideal society and its appropriate forms. David DeLong, looking at Wright's first great projects for the wilderness, saw him envisioning nothing less than a new American landscape, shaped in response to American ideals as he interpreted them. William Cronin saw Wright's intent as trying to breathe life into matter by relating it to the whole of creation. And Wright himself characterized the Broadacre City proposal, which is what you're looking at right now, in which so much of his revolutionary agenda was outlined, as the new frontier. The next principle I want to talk about is design for all. Wright believed that his cause, in that cause of architecture, was the cause of democracy, making architecture not to acknowledge the privilege of the wealthy and the power of institutions, but to serve everyone. He tried to accomplish this by recognizing the ordinary household as the anchor of a free society, and concentrating his powers of innovation in planning and design on the individual home, the patterns of life within it, and its place in the wider landscape. Wright saw the home as the primary means by which architecture can transform society, the main instrument of reform. The home is a place for growth of the soul, as he put it, and as a model for the larger society. It's fair to say that no other modern architect ranged into so many building types as Wright did, But it's also important to note that no other has ever come back so persistently to designing individual dwellings, to designing homes. Wright believed that experiments in reworking domestic space in their situations were the essential means to deal with changing times and possibilities of moving them toward the good. And you'll notice that with a lot of great architects, once they start doing the very large projects, the big public projects, they never come back to houses. Houses were their stepping stone. And for Wright, homes were really the center point of everything. Perhaps unique among great architects, Wright approached this aspiration not through standardization, but by finding means to customize every individual circumstance. Truly an architecture for all, not a cookie-cutter solution. Wright believed, I jumped forward a few. If you wondered why I kept on staring at that, I jumped forward a few slides. Wright believed that his notion of design for all was, as he put it, truly fundamental to democracy. We will find the democratic home to be a part of the man himself, placed upon his own share of the earth, and building there a hearth he can call his own. To that prophetic expression of himself, man must cling for salvation. Wright continued that everyone's individuality has a right to its expression in its own environment. But our ideal is democracy, and democracy is built on the balance between individual freedom and the harmony of the whole. Individuality is as essential to democracy as breath is to your lungs. Risking immense popularity, Wright not only worked tirelessly to help his apprentices gain conscientious objector status in World War II, but he actually camped out at the gates of a prison to show his support. And yet, he was equally tireless in developing humane proposals for defense housing. As early as 1923, Wright started to lament the fact that he had spent so much time on such romances as the Imperial Hotel, which is this in Japan, when what really concerned him were the problems of a rapidly industrializing and urbanizing America. By the 1930s, he was ready to say that the one issue he would rather solve than build anything he could think of was the small house problem in America. And from his earliest days of practice forward, the middle-class dwelling was a primary interest. A fireproof home for $5,000. This was in the Ladies' Home Journal. A light-filled workspace for the Larkin Company. A cheaply built suburban meeting house like the Unity Temple. And an everyday convenience like a service station. Don't you want to go get gas right now? But I think Wright was at his most triumphant and optimistic when he was explaining the build-it-yourself possibilities of the Usonian automatic houses toward the end of his life. And of course, you will soon have a Usonian automatic house. Wright celebrated this system of design that could finally bring a distinctive, varied, and beautiful dwelling down below the middle class to, as he put it, the many millions throughout the nation, the entire lower middle of society. It's been said that experimentation in all of its senses was the crux of Wright's method, and it was a word that he used often, christening, for example, his brilliant scheme for the clustered homes near Philadelphia as the Ardmore experiment. Wright declared that every project in the arts is a matter of problem solving, and that the true building comes from finding the unique, original governing idea that solves that problem. One thing instead of many things, a great thing instead of a collection of smaller ones. Wright's thoughts on the role of imagination in architectural creation are interesting. He said, "It is the common sense of the thing that has interested me, but my appeal is, as always, to the imagination and to the possibility of salvation by imagination." And yet he repeatedly warned students and apprentices that the imaginative and right solution comes not from a flash of inspiration, but empirically, through that core principle of experimentation, through patient and open-minded inquiry, challenges, and testing. I believe, he said, that it is in the search for the answer that the answer lies. Imagination, he said, was the fruit of sweat and concentration and grind. And he urged students to take nothing for granted as beautiful or ugly. Take every building to pieces and challenge every feature. Learning by doing was a central principle in Wright's practice and in his practice in general, and of the Taliesin Fellowship, who were his apprentices in particular. True study, said Wright, is a form of experience. The fellowship itself is an experiment and an impertinence. Intelligent social human beings designing and creating a new integrity in the atmosphere of environment, conscious of the design of the whole, by felling trees, digging ditches, planting and harvesting. Taliesin, he said, is a way of life. Action is a form of idea, and idea is just as surely a form of action. That way of life remains the dominant principle of the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture, as true for the students who started their Masters of Architecture studies this fall as it was for the men and women who first joined Wright's Taliesin Fellowship in 1932, which is why, as Scott was talking about the work that they're doing with the University of Arkansas students as they're working on the pavilion, it's so meaningful to see that approach of learning by doing. Wright deeply felt that you couldn't possibly create something great if you didn't know how to build it. He also felt you couldn't create a great home if you didn't know how to cook. And it was all part of this whole that he approached. Such was and is, in fact, the spirit of Taliesin. As the scholar Donald Hoffman put it, Wright could think of his studio homes in Wisconsin and Arizona as experimental outposts that kept alive the frontier spirit of freedom and of all the frontier way of life had stood for: integrity, an expansive spirit, buoyancy, restless energy, imagination, and what Wright himself called the joy that comes from hard work. Provocation was a recurring theme throughout Wright's work. Since we're talking about provocation, I thought I'd show a little video of him on the Mike Wallace show.
Do you think that you are any less rebellious, less of a radical in your art and life than you were a quarter of a century ago, Mr. Wright?
Rather more so. Only more quiet about it. I attend the greatest of all churches.
Which is?
And I put a capital N on nature and call it my church. You don't have to push hard or talk loud or in any way get up to defend what you believe in. If it is right and if it is good and it is sound, it will defend you if you give it a chance. I think you should not read spasmodically. I don't think you should read just for the sake of reading either. I think if you're going to read, you should read something that'll feed you, build you up, strengthen you, and be what you need to know.
Do you believe in your personal immortality?
Yes.
You believe?
Insofar as I am immortal, I will be immortal. To me, young has no meaning. It's something you can do nothing about. Nothing at all. But youth is a quality, and if you have it, you never lose it. And when they put you into the box, that's your immortality.
Mr. Wright, I thank you for spending this half hour with us.
Well, you're welcome. I hope it's been of some interest
It has indeed.
to whoever's been listening, but I don't know.
A humble ending for someone who said, "Insofar as I am immortal, I shall be immortal." If anybody had a hard time hearing any of that, the foundation has a YouTube channel, and we've got that whole clip along with his entire appearance on What's My Line, which is a little less erudite, as you might imagine. So Wright's language and his opinions were, of course, infamously provocative. But the deeper provocations, perhaps, were his buildings themselves, from the exaggerated cantilevers of Fallingwater to a resort made of huge dishes poised on plinths. He persistently did the opposite or the inverse of the expected. For example, his conception of the Johnson Wax Building, set in a Midwestern cityscape, to use the roof as a window. Right where you always expected this constriction, he explained, you look at the sky. These provocations always had a purpose. In this case, Wright described it as feeling the interior space and the great transformation which took place when that act was performed. And as part of this provocation, as part of this engagement, you also have to keep in mind that this was in the middle of deeply industrial and relatively barren Racine, Wisconsin at the time. Windows that you looked out of flat would have brought you nothing. But windows in the sky that brought it down, and windows where you could see the light but not see anything past it, was where he went with that particular provocation. The scholar Neil Levine points out a number of these extreme defiances of convention. For example, the Guggenheim Museum, rising in a widening spiral, defied a host of orthodoxies, flouting the modern notion of the setback, flouting the notion of what shapes connote and actually achieve stability, and flouting the tradition of presenting works of art in a fixed relation to the viewer. As Wright himself said, the Guggenheim overturned the idea of a gallery as a cellular composition of compartments, instead setting up one great space on a single continuous floor where works of art unfold as if in an unbreaking wave. In the V.C. Morris gift shop in San Francisco, Neil Levine sees Wright's blank brick wall as a provocation that flew in the face of modern design by choosing concealment over the market logic of a storefront display window. Wright called himself an ideal iconoclast. He also described his master Sullivan the same way. And his work repeatedly turns conventions about the shape and scale and order of things on their head. Widely publicized proposals showed a mile-high office building, a steel cathedral the size of a small town, and a state capitol in the form of a desert oasis. That one never got built. But the spire from the one that never got built did get put into a shopping center that's right by the hotel I stayed in last week. You can look at Wright's iconoclasm not just as posture, but as a deep belief in the obligation to challenge conventional and popular points of view, in open-minded discourse and debate, and as a way of advancing ideas. For 12 years, from 1941 to 1953, the masthead of the Taliesin Journal read, "A free, fearless, enlightened minority is the conscience of a democratic nation." And those were more than just words for Wright. Wright was one of the very first voices in America to courageously speak out against McCarthyism. He publicly stated that the country had never been in any danger from communism, adding that men that think it is in danger from communism are infinitely more dangerous than communism could ever be. It may or may not be a coincidence that this attack, presented as a front-page editorial in the Madison newspaper against Joe McCarthy, a senator from his own state, was quickly followed by the tax authorities' relentless pursuit of Wright and Taliesin. Or it may have been that he wasn't paying his taxes, but that is the sequence. In Wright's mature years, he loved to portray himself as a lonely voice in the wilderness. But he actually remained, in reality, deeply engaged in the educational and cultural debates and movements of his time, and he was quick to apply them to architecture. From his earliest days leading Sullivan's design office and talking about design with the Cliffhangers Club in Chicago, to his last years with the Taliesin Fellowship, his work and thinking was always done in the context of association, through engagement in the field. And the idea of a creative community around him, of teaching, of apprenticeship, and of guests coming to see him was essential to his development and to his principles. He didn't just produce great architecture, he produced great architects and artists worldwide. Wright was also deeply committed to public engagement. He played a vital role in building a wider discourse on architecture through specialized publications and exhibitions on a scale and level that had simply not been seen before in this country. Uniquely, slowly, and with increasing passion, he became committed to an engagement with the general public, writing for and lecturing to the widest audiences from the first publication of his autobiography onwards. Circulating his Broadacre experiment through exhibitions not just at the Museum of Modern Art, but at department stores in Radio City, circulating his life work through regular and popular publications and exhibitions, and making absolutely relentless use of television when television first came onto the landscape. If democracy was to build, he put forth, then all must be made aware of the principles and possibilities of a democratic architecture. That carefully cultivated figure of a little giant in a cape and hat was not just a matter of vanity. Wright needed to be a showman to get his message across. And if he was able to do so by literally turning his back to the paying audience and talking to the students who had come there for free, well, in his mind, that was all the better. This is the core principle that gets to me the most. In 1958, when a reporter asked Frank Lloyd Wright to describe the dominant element in your philosophy, Wright answered with just one word: integrity. In talking about his work, Wright often used the phrase integrity of design in place of the much better known phrase organic architecture. Integrity of design, or organic architecture, as I've come to understand it in the last 2.5 years, does not suggest a particular style or a particular look or a particular relationship to the landscape. Integrity of design means that every building derives or grows organically from a single governing idea that relates to its conditions and context. Appropriate to time, place, and man, as the prolific Wright scholar Bruce Brooks Pfeiffer once explained it. Or as Wright put it himself, integration means that nothing is of any great value except as naturally related to the whole. Integration means that nothing is of any great value except as naturally related to the whole. That's why I love the way that Scott's working with the students on this. It's about the principles. It's not about emulation. Appropriate to time, place, and man. You're not trying to copy what Wright did in 1959 or 49 or 39. Balance is central to Wright's concept of integrity. Just as Wright's concept of democracy was about the balance between individual freedoms and the harmony of the whole, he was adamant that individual parts of a building must derive from a logic to that whole, and that buildings themselves to the logic of their surroundings. For Wright, connection to nature was both a core principle and a personal way of life, and a pretty appropriate thing to talk about here at Crystal Bridges. His ideal meal was a picnic. His most famous house, Fallingwater, sits on the Kaufman's favorite picnic spot. And his last active day on Earth was spent hiking with the fellowship out to a desert viewpoint with hampers of food. Neil Levine tells us that nature was Wright's constant preoccupation, and that the way he abstracted and represented it in his architecture is the underlying theme of all of his work. I think he'd be pretty excited about introducing his house in the underside of a leaf. Asked once which book had meant the most to him, Wright replied, "The Book of Nature." He traced his first understanding of nature and nature's structures to his childhood at the plow in Wisconsin's Jones Valley, drawing a map of his course across the stony fields as the cover of his autobiography. It was from his observations of growth principles that he drew his famous definition of organic architecture, an architecture that develops from within outward in harmony with the conditions of its beings, as distinguished from one that is applied from without. And it was back into nature that he committed his buildings. A great building must be a great natural, he said, a living feature of man's environment, as bees, trees, or flowers are of his earth. And Wright's connection to nature also fueled a focus on ecological consciousness and sustainability throughout his career. Wright talked of architecture not as deferring to, but as completing the work of nature. And his projects in the landscape were often very bold. Think of the Huntington Hartford Resort or Eagle Feather. But he also talked about architecture as an atonement, a means of reconciling man to the earth. And he was scrupulous in his Usonian houses to develop plans that would do away with as much as he could of the most ecologically harmful infrastructure. And all of his proposed interventions on the landscape, even the most ambitious, were ultimately designed to awaken a new sympathy with the earth. That was his ideal of architecture as atonement, that it could be used to develop an instinctual and poetic understanding of the earth on which we live, without which we cannot be impelled to protect it. First, Broadacre City, and then the Marin County project are clear examples of this ambition. Marin promising the possibility through, again as Wright said it, a growing unit that proceeds from hill to hill, of civilization simply stretching gently across the landscape like an endless bridge. But connection is a core value in Wright's work and life, as a corollary to integrity and integration, applies well beyond connection to nature. It includes connection to each other as individuals and as communities, connection to our built environments, and connection to art and beauty. The kind of thing that we find at Unity Temple, or that historian Jack Quinan describes at the Larkin Building's Light Court, which he sees as demonstrating the unity of all things in nature and the aspiration of all matter to a spiritual ideal. As one of the clients for the Larkin Building put it, things, as well as people, display an integrity or lack of it. And Larkin, in the rugged simplicity of its undressed materials and the clarity with which the buildings displayed its structure, by being so honestly put together, would itself inspire and diffuse ideas, inventions, harmony, and fellowship. Or as Wright put it himself, the goal was beauty, a word we use reluctantly now for fear we will be dubbed sentimentalists, but beauty is the object of it all. And one final connection worth mentioning, connection to change. Wright said that there is one great truth of which mankind can be certain, that all is in a process of change, and the law of change is the only valid, visible law which man can comprehend. From his first major statement on the art and craft of the machine in 1901, Wright remained constant in his belief that architecture should both embrace and drive change in society, change in technology, and change in materials, and help us to use them for aesthetic and social well-being. These changes that occur so silently and tremendously throughout the life of humanity all have to be met with a new philosophy, Wright said. And it is from architecture that the philosophy must come in order to awaken society to what it is really headed for. Late in life, Wright identified all of his best projects as transitional works, representing an idea in flux. And he went on to say, the moment a thing becomes a fixed point, it is dead. The true living thing is always in between and in a state of becoming, just as the reality of the building lies in intangibles in flux, light, vista, movement, and the space within. These core principles and supporting ideas and values are as powerful today, I think, as they were in Wright's time. In fact, I think they're even more powerful today. And they also play an enormous role in shaping what the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation does in all three areas of our mission: in preservation, in education, and in public engagement and access. They guide and inform our fully accredited and forward-thinking Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture, the experience we endeavor to create for the 150,000 plus visitors who come on tours to the two Taliesin's every year, our K through 12 educational programs, our programs for the field of architecture and design, such as our symposium on the intersection of neuroscience and architecture, which is what this image is from, publications, including books, online publications, and our quarterly Frank Lloyd Wright magazine. And we have a copy of our magazine for everyone when you leave today, or I'm presuming it's down here by the time you leave today. It drives Energizing Taliesin West, which is our program to make this entire international landmark a net zero energy site, producing all of the energy that we use. And this entire solar field, which is just one part of Energizing Taliesin West, you can't miss it when you drive up the drive. It's right there, and we make you look at it. And then when you're in the historic core and you look right at it, you can't see it because it's hidden by the cacti. It drives development of Frank Lloyd Wright products, allowing people to have a little bit of Wright's design as part of their daily lives. It drives our service to Wright sites across the country, and boy, are we thrilled that one of those Wright sites is now right here. Our arts and cultural programs, which include extended artist residencies, and our collaboration with the Museum of Modern Art and Columbia University on the joint stewardship of the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation archives. Through these programs, we endeavor to celebrate the place of architecture and the arts in enriching the quality and dignity of life. These core values and principles, which are found throughout Wright's work and in all of our programs, as I said at the beginning, are deeply relevant to who we are and how we live our lives, as individuals, as communities, and as a society. And I think that they illustrate Wright's thesis that nothing is of any great value except as naturally related to the whole. To close with one last Wright quote, when we come to understand architecture as the essential nature of all harmonious structure, we will see that it is the architecture of music that inspired Bach and Beethoven. It is the architecture of painting that is inspiring Picasso as it inspired Velázquez. And it is the architecture of life itself that is the inspiration for the great poets and philosophers. Thank you very much for having me here tonight.